Hello and welcome to this presentation on the R15 program. The R15 program is the Academic Research Enhancement Award, or AREA, for undergraduate focused institutions, and the Research Enhancement Award program, or REAP, for health professional schools and graduate schools. So I appreciate you all attending the session today. I am excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lisa Chadwick. She is from the National Human Genome Research Institute, NHGRI. She's also worked at other institutes and brings a wealth of information. You're in really good hands today. She's going to go over a slide set just to get a common understanding of the programs, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A and hopefully have a really good interactive session. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Lisa.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us for this session on the NIH's R15 program. As Sherry mentioned, I'm a program director at NHGRI. I guess we're going to see my kitten in the back too. I am the R15 contact for NHGRI, among some of my other responsibilities there. And as she mentioned too, we're looking forward to answering your questions. We'll take some questions at the end of the talk, but I have several very knowledgeable colleagues answering questions in the chat, and you can also put your questions there. Okay, so just to start, I want to give you an overview of the kinds of things that we're going to cover this afternoon. We'll be talking about what is the R15 program and what is its goal. We'll talk about some of the information that you will find in the funding opportunity announcement, or I will probably call it an FOA during this talk. We'll talk about what differentiates the R15 from other mechanisms at the NIH, like the R01, some of the differences between our two R15 programs, the AREA and REAP, and then I'll also talk about some strategies for writing successful R15 applications. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is included in the funding announcement, so I encourage you to read it carefully if you're considering applying for an R15 award. So at the NIH, we know that great science is being done at many different kinds of institutions, not just major research centers. The R15 is a research grant program that supports research at institutions that are not considered to be necessarily research intensive. They don't receive substantial funding from the NIH. There are two key features to this program. One is that it provides research opportunities to students that might not have access to them otherwise. This is an important part, I think, of cultivating our scientific workforce, because being exposed to research is one of the ways you might realize that you want to go on and do it as your career. The other is to help strengthen the overall research environment at the institution. So the R15 supports 3 years of research. You would have a 12-page research strategy section where you'll describe the research that you plan to do. The budget for the R15 is $300,000 in direct costs, and that covers the entire 3-year period. And then at the end of the 3-year period, you can apply to renew the R15. So the NIH has a lot of different grant mechanisms. What differentiates the R15 from, say, the R01? So one thing that's important to note is that both of these are research grants. The research proposed in an R15 should make an important scientific contribution, but the scope of the R15 is more limited than an R01. The budget and project period are both smaller, and you may also have access to fewer resources at your institution that might limit what you're able to do. Although it is a research grant, the R15 has those other important goals that I mentioned that make it different from the R01. So you will also need to describe the research opportunities that will be provided to students and how the grant will help strengthen the research environment of your institution. These are things we'll talk about in a little bit more depth later in this talk. So the NIH has 2 different R15 funding announcements that are targeted to different types of institutions. One is the AREA, the Academic Research Enhancement Award. That is intended for undergraduate-focused institutions, while the Research Enhancement Award Program, or REAP, is intended for health professional schools and graduate schools. Now, when we say health professional schools, we mean things like schools of nursing, pharmacy, dentistry, and a variety of other fields like this. This is spelled out in greater detail in the eligibility section of the REAP FOA. So if you have questions about that, that's where you should look. There are also 2 funding announcements for each of these programs, one of which is for applications that include clinical trials and the other is not. I do want to note that the REAP FOA is close to expiring, so you will need to look for the new announcement number when it comes out. Also, if you're thinking about these, be sure to check the notices of special interest that are associated with the R15, which are linked from the area and REAP FOAs. As I'm sure you've heard during this seminar this week, notices of special interest are ways that NIH institutes can tell you specific kinds of research that they're interested in. So now let's talk about the different eligibility criteria for the 2 R15 announcements. As I mentioned, the area is intended for institutions that primarily serve undergraduate students, while the REAP is intended for health professional schools or graduate schools. Now, both of these programs also have an additional financial requirement. The institution cannot have received more than $6 million a year in funding from the NIH in 4 of the last 7 years. That number includes both the direct and indirect costs. Now, things are a little bit more complicated for larger institutions that have multiple degree granting components. Some of those might be eligible and others not. First, what you need to do is determine whether the component enrolls more undergraduates or graduate students. And that will tell you whether you're looking at area or REAP. And then you have to look at the funding level of those components. Now, for area, you would need to look at the total NIH funding levels of all of the non-health professional components of the institution. For the REAP, you would need to look at the total NIH funding level of the institution as a whole, all components. If this is still confusing, and I can understand why it might be, I would encourage you to check the R15 page at grants.nih.gov. It has tons of information, including some instructions for how to determine how much NIH funding your institution has. I wanted to make one more important point about institutional eligibility. So these FOAs require you to upload a signed letter from your provost or other similar institutional official that verifies that your institution meets those eligibility criteria. You would upload that in the other attachments section. And this is really important because if you don't include this, your application would be considered non-responsive and it would be withdrawn without being reviewed. You have put a lot of work into this application, and I know you don't want that to happen. So make sure you've included this documentation about eligibility in your application. So now that we're familiar with the institutional eligibility criteria, let's talk about the eligibility criteria for the PI. The PI must have a primary appointment at an eligible institution for that FOA. One important note is that the PI cannot be a PI on another NIH research grant at the time of award. And when we say research, that generally means grants that start with that letter R. There's a little bit more detail about this on that R15 page that I mentioned earlier. And if you have questions about other grant mechanisms and how they impact eligibility, I would encourage you to look there. Now, it is okay for you to have other roles on someone else's grant, as long as you're not a named PI. As far as collaborators, you can choose to have multiple PIs on your application. That is fine, but all PIs that are listed have to meet those same requirements. People often ask me whether they can have collaborators at institutions that are not eligible. You can, but I want you to remember what the goals of the R15 program are. You know, if there's a lot of work that's being done at another institution, is that really engaging the students at your institution? Is it really adding to your institution's research environment. So you have to think carefully about including collaborators on an R15 application. So now that we've covered all these eligibility criteria, it's time to put your application together. The first step in putting together a strong grant application is to carefully read the funding announcement. Everything that you are going to need to know is going to be captured in there. Next, think about your specific aims. Put together a draft of them. One thing that's really important about responding to funding announcements is that you're sure that the research that you're proposing is relevant to one of the institutes that is participating in the funding announcement. Not all institutes participate in the R15 announcements. And if you're doing something that's not scientifically within the mission of any of the participating institutes, your application would be withdrawn. We've already talked about, you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure you've checked. One way you can look at this is by searching NIH Reporter. You can look for other kinds of research like yours and see what institutes have funded it. And you can also reach out to the program officer at the relevant institute. They will be listed in the scientific context section of the funding announcement. Now, I hear you saying to yourself, but Lisa, program officers are probably really busy and they're probably also very scary to talk to. But I assure you that we are here to help you. I'm sure you've heard this 100 times this week at this seminar. We can give you all kinds of help and advice. I can help you figure out whether your proposed research is a good fit for my institute and for this funding announcement. I can also give you some thoughts about where I think your application is likely to be reviewed. I can also give feedback on your proposed aims. I think overall, it can be really helpful to talk to a program officer before you submit an application. There's a lot that you can get from that interaction. Now, if you want to talk to a program officer, in my experience, the best way to do it is to contact them by email. Send them your aims, tell them you're considering applying for this announcement, and ask to set up a call. And then when they forget to email you back, it's not because they don't care about talking to you or they don't want to, it's because we get a lot of email. So don't hesitate to email them again if you need to. So next, we're going to talk about some of the elements of a successful R15 application. Something that's really important to remember is that even though there's an important aspect of student involvement, this is first and foremost a research grant. So what you propose needs to be scientifically interesting, something that could result in publishable results. You need to have a clear and well-justified hypothesis. The experiments that you propose should be feasible, and it should be realistic that you would actually be able to complete them within the budget and time frame of the grant and with the resources that are available to you. Now, the research strategy is a very important part of the application, of any application. For the R15, you'll have 12 pages to tell the reviewers what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it. As you're writing, I want to make sure that you remember to look at the review criteria and program goals in the funding opportunity and the funding announcement, and make sure that you're giving that information in your application. Those are the specific things that reviewers are going to be asked to comment on. So you want to make sure that they're in your application and they're easy to find. If you have preliminary data, you should also include that. It provides support to your hypothesis, and it shows reviewers that you can actually do the work that you propose in the application. This is also the section of the application where you would describe how you're going to involve students in the research. That is, after all, a major goal of this program. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can involve students in your project. I've listed a couple of them here. They can present at meetings. And these don't have to be national meetings. They can be as simple as presenting at lab meeting or other sorts of campus events. They can help you design experiments. They can collect and analyze data. They can help you when you're writing manuscripts. So how do you show this sort of meaningful involvement in your application? Well, you can cover it not just in the research strategy, but also in your bio sketch. You can talk about your history of mentoring students, highlight some of the places where they've been co-authors on papers from your lab. You can also talk about how you'll go about recruiting them to work in your lab. And it's really important in these kinds of things to be specific. So a vague general comment about involving students isn't compelling. You want to be specific that shows that you've really thought about it. So the research strategy is, of course, very important, but you do also need to submit a budget. Just a few points about that. The R15 is what we call a multi-year funded award. So that means you request all of the money up front in the first year, and then you spend it out over the course of the program. The maximum budget that you can request is $300,000 in direct costs. And you can use that for a wide range of expenses. That includes things like reagents and consumables for your research, student wages, helping to pay collaborators, and travel. So after you submit your application, the next stop is the review. R15 applications can be reviewed in a few different places. They're either reviewed in special emphasis panels with other R15s, or they're reviewed in standing study sections in a cluster with other R15s. You won't really have control over this as a PI, and either way, the reviewers are going to be looking at those review criteria that are listed in the funding announcement. That's why it's so important that you know what they are and you've included that information in your application. Of course, there are a couple of ways to figure out where an application like yours might end up. Again, you can search Reporter and see where other R15s like yours have gone. And you can also talk to a program officer. They'll know where they see R15s that are assigned to their institute be reviewed. Whoop. Now, no matter where your grant is reviewed, your reviewers are going to appreciate a well-written application. I'm sure you've heard a lot this week about how to put together a good application. It's important, I think, to remember that reviewers are just like you, right? They run labs, they're doing teaching, they also have regular life responsibilities. And on top of that, they're reading a bunch of grants to get ready for the review. So you want to make your application really easy for them to read. Another thing that's important to remember is that they may not be experts in your specific field. You want what you're writing to be something that can be understandable by a broad audience. So lay things out in a logical way, be clear and concise in your writing. Make sure you're not using jargon that they might not understand. Also, organize the page. Don't be afraid of including white space in your application. No one wants to open an application at 10 o'clock at night and be greeted by a wall of dense text. Also, make sure you proofread the application. That shows that you've put some thought into it. And I've definitely heard reviewers comment when they see a lot of errors in an application. Finally, know what they're looking for and just serve it to them on a silver platter. You know what the review criteria are. They're spelled out in the funding announcement. You don't want to make them have to hunt through your application to find that information. Just give it to them really easily. So after the review, first, you'll spend some time refreshing your Commons account, looking for your score to be posted. And then a few weeks later, you'll get your summary statement. This is going to contain a lot of information. One of the most important things, though, is that contact information for the program officer. Make sure you use that. We can really help you go through your summary statement and understand what's important and what you need to address. It's also going to contain information about the review panel, who was the SRO, who were the reviewers on the panel. It'll have the score that your application received. If there were human or animal concerns raised by the reviewers, that will be noted in the summary statement. And then, of course, for the applications that were discussed, you'll also get a summary of the discussion. That basically tells you what happened in the panel. Even if your application wasn't discussed, you'll get written critiques from all of the assigned reviewers. And then you'll also get any budgetary recommendations that the reviewers made when they reviewed your application. So that's all the slides that I put together today. I just wanted to raise a few final thoughts. First, I really recommend that you look at the R15 page at grants.nih.gov. There's so much information there. I actually look at it all the time when I'm answering people's questions. There's a FAQ that has every question you can think of, plus 100 questions you probably didn't even think you needed to know. There's also a listing of research areas. There's a tool to help you figure out which of the R15 announcements is most appropriate for you, and those instructions for how to determine what the funding level of your organization is. So really, there's a ton of information there. Look through that, and you'll get everything you need to know. And then also, as I've said a lot of times during this talk, make sure you contact the scientific contacts that are listed in the RFA. If you click on that Section 7 agency contacts, that's going to bring you down to the section where all of the individual institute contacts are listed. Send them an email, let them know what you're thinking about, and ask to set up a call. They're going to be happy to talk to you, and hopefully together you can help you get successful with this R15 application. All right, so at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I will take any questions that have not already been answered in the chat.
All right, well, great. So that was a lot of great information, Lisa. Thank you. I know there's a lot of food for thought for our participants. A couple things that came up during your session. We're going to get to those in just a second. I did want to mention that the recording for this session is going to be available again within about 48 hours. And that will be accessible through our platform for the seminar for the next 30 days. And then afterwards, it will be on our YouTube channel. So we can keep going back and go back to that great advice from Lisa. Also, I know you've gotten so much information. A lot of you are brand new to NIH, and the seminar is probably just going overload right now in your heads. As Lisa mentioned, we've got tons of information online, lots of resources available to you. So don't be afraid that you're going to go home and not have a place to go back and get to that information. So that's out there as well. We did have some great questions here. Let me start with this one. Where would an applicant describe student inclusion?
Right. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. Of course, in the research strategy, you can describe how the students are going to be involved in the actual research. That's where you would talk about that students would be involved in helping plan the experiments, collecting and analyzing data, and other things that they might be doing. And then another important place to put this information is in your biosketch. This is where you show sort of your history of doing that. Reviewers do like to see that you have included students as authors on publications, for example. So highlight that, make sure you underline in your biosketch where, the students that have been authors on publications. Talk about the numbers of students that you have mentored previously, where they've gone, that sort of thing. That's another great place to talk about the student involvement.
Super. So are the area and REAP programs meant to be mutually exclusive?
Yeah, they are. And that's because they depend on what the major focus of students is in that institution or component. So if there are more undergraduates than there are graduate students, you would be looking at the area. If you're coming from a graduate school or those health professional schools, that's going to be REAP. Although a larger institution may have some components that are one or the other, it really depends on where the PI's primary appointment is and what sort of the student composition is of that component.
Great. All right. This one was, how do I determine my organization's financial eligibility? And I think we've touched on this a few times, but do you have any additional thoughts on that one?
So mostly that's going to be searching the reporter. If you go to that grants.nih.gov webpage, there is a link there for, and it'll link to, I think, a PDF that goes through kind of specifically how you would go through reporter, what kinds of fields you would need to include in your search. And then that would help you figure out what your, what kind of NIH funding that component of the institution has received.
Yeah, that resource is really good. It does walk through step by step. It tells you exactly what to click within the tool. It was recently updated to match the latest and greatest interface for our reporter tools. So that's a great place to go. And I think you also mentioned,
the reporter is really good. And I'm sure that there have been sections at this seminar about reporter.
Yes.
There is so much information that you can get there. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to just dig around. You would be surprised at how much you can find out about what has been funded at the NIH by using reporter.
Absolutely. And we do have that matchmaker tool within reporter that if you take your aims and drop it right into matchmaker, it'll go and tell you what institutes might be interested in your research. And that's a good way to get started there. You can even use that matchmaker tool then to pop over to the program officials tab to find the program officials that have that portfolio in, that are owning that portfolio. So really good place to get some additional information.
Absolutely.
Looks like somebody has heard about our R16 SHORE program. So what's the difference between the R15 program and the R16 SHORE program?
So I'm less familiar with the R16. I would encourage you to read both of those funding announcements. But I think that eligibility criteria and the goal are really different between those these two programs. If you've got questions about that and which one is the right one for you, I would reach out to the contacts that are listed in both of those funding announcements, and they can help you sort of sort through that and make sure that you're targeting the right application.
Right. It's always great advice to go to that funding opportunity announcement, read it top to bottom once through, really good. Make sure that you go look at section 4, which is your application and submission information. That's going to tell you anything specific to that opportunity, especially in this case, that eligibility information section is going to be really important. And at the end of every one of our funding opportunity announcements, we have contacts for the scientific research. We have the review, and we have financial management contacts, as well as contacts to our ERA, Electronic Research Administration systems that you'll use to prepare and submit your applications. So if you're new to NIH, you're probably not as versed in that as well. There's tutorials and things out there too for those systems.
Right.
Does the R15 cover indirect costs, and is there a rate limit?
So yes, you can request indirect costs. The $300,000 budget that I mentioned, that's the direct cost budget, which is of course the part that you care about. That's the part that you actually see in your lab. But you can request indirect costs. I'm not aware that there's a limit, but I think that that's the kind of question that if you want to be sure, I would check the FAQs on the R15 page. And if you don't see the answer there, you can reach out to some of the grants management contacts in the FOA. They're the ones that are really on top of those kinds of answers, and they would be able to answer that question for you.
Super. So if you're new to the NIH process, you probably know that it is hyper competitive. We have, our success rates are low, and frankly, they're lower for your first application coming in because it's just the facts, right? Do you have any special advice for doing a resubmission? And basically, a resubmission application is you submitted one application, it went through review, you didn't get funded, and you're going to come back and try again.
Oh, yes. So actually, if you didn't see, there was a after hours session or something yesterday that talked about what to do with a resubmission. You can probably go and watch a recording of that when that gets posted, and I would encourage you to look at that. But some of the really important things that they mentioned in there was, number one, and you've heard me say this before, make sure you talk to a program officer. There's going to be one listed in the summary statement. In most cases, they will have listened to the review, taken some notes. I've got all kinds of notes about the things that I've listened to. And they can help you sort through that and decide what are the most important things to address versus what are the things that you might read as an applicant and get mad about, right? So that happens all the time. People call me and they say, oh, but they said this, and that's just not true. And they get really focused on that. And it wasn't really a score driving issue. So I can help you sort of sort through that and decide where you really need to focus your energies. You also should contact the program officer, even if your grant didn't get discussed. I've read so many summary statements in my 13 years at the NIH that I don't need to have heard the review to really be able to pick out what the important things are that you need to recognize. So make sure that you contact them. The other thing is when you write your revised application, you'll get a page to talk about what kinds of things you did in response to the review. There's also, I think, a real art to writing that page. You want to make sure that you are respectful, even no matter how angry you are about the things that you read in your summary statement. You want to say, thank you to these wonderful reviewers. Thanks for all of your insightful tips. And I have covered them here, here, and here. And I appreciate how this has helped me make a better application. So those are some of my tips. Also, I think, as you should always do, ask colleagues to read your application and that introduction statement before you submit it the first time and before you submit a revised application. And not necessarily colleagues that are experts in the same field as you. I mentioned, I'm sure you've heard this before, everybody kind of expects that reviewers are the same kind of scientists that they are, and that's just not true. So you want to make sure that a wide variety of people can read what you've written, understand why it's important, and that you've made a compelling case. And so giving it to a variety of different people can help you get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, that's great advice. Another question here, does being a PI of a subaward on an R01 disqualify you from being PI on an R15?
Not as a PI on a subaward. So if you were a PI on a subaward, you wouldn't be listed as one of the PIs of the application. You would be like a subcontract or a co-investigator or something. Or investigator. And that does not, exactly, that does not impact your eligibility for the R15.
Great. In your experience, what are some of the biggest mistakes first-time R15 applicants make in their applications?
So one, I think, is achieving the right balance between writing a research application and writing an application that really showcases what you're going to do with students. You'd really have to do both of these in this 12-page research strategy. So make sure that you've got a really compelling research question and all of that they're going to be excited about the research that you're proposing. It isn't really a training grant. And so people sometimes make the mistake of sort of thinking about it a little bit like a training grant and leaning a little bit too heavily in that direction.
Gotcha.
So I think that is one of them. The other one I think that I have seen is including too many collaborators that are not at your institution. And I always tell people, you do want to have collaborators that you need so that the reviewers are going to understand that you know how to do what you're proposing to do in the application, or that you have the right people on your team. But you also want to have that balance between having that expertise and not taking so much of your research out of the institution, because they really still need to understand that this is going to benefit the students at your institution and your sort of local research environment. So those are two things that I can think of.
Super. Okay, let's see. Oh, why is the project period for the R15 smaller? I would imagine they're comparing that to like an R01. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. That is a question for whoever developed these mechanisms. But it does mean that, you know, sort of the scope of what you propose in an R15 would be smaller. And you just have to think about it in terms of not proposing too much. It's very common for people, especially first-time applicants, to propose way more than they can do, even in a 5-year R01. So now you have to think about that in the context of 3 years. So that's something.
We have quite a few questions about budgets here. Again, remember that we have grants management folks listed in our funding opportunity announcements, and they would be the best people to reach out to with those types of questions, which kind of leads to the fact that I know it seems intimidating and scary to kind of reach out to NIH, and nobody wants to be thought that they don't have all the answers, but we don't expect you to have all the answers, right? It really is a safe place. With that said, though, it's kind of important to make sure that you're reaching out to the right people. You know, our program officials like Dr. Chadwick here would love to talk about your science. They're probably less excited to talk about the margins of your application and what the formatting should be, right? Or how to do something in Assist. You know, so if you have those basic questions, our application guide page on our website is out there for you. We have a grants information team for that. But when you get down to the science, reach out to our program officials. And when you get down to the budgets, reach out to our grants folks. And they're glad to talk about that information with you.
Yes. And if you are talking to a program officer and you have a burning question about margins, it's true. I don't care, but I can also help direct you to the right person. We do that all the time. So don't ever be afraid to contact the NIH staff. Right. Really, it is our literal job to help you with these things. We are definitely want to do that. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see, what else do we have here? What if a college is both undergrad focused and has a graduate school? Would area or REAP be the right choice?
So that is a complicated question that has to do with the components, the degree granting components. And there is a decision tree tool on that R15 page that I would encourage you to look at. So if those different parts of the institution both grant separate degrees, then it really matters which one your appointment is at, and then what the sort of graduate to undergraduate focus is of that component. So and that decision tree will really help you with that.
Absolutely. And I think if you get into a situation where it is nuanced, that is really when you need to reach out, right? You need to go out and talk to folks and talk it through with somebody before you go through all of the effort of, you know, preparing that application. You need to really get a handle on that. Yeah. Let's see, we've got about 4 minutes left. Let's see if we have time for one more question. We have somebody who is asking about what CT means and the FOA names. That is for clinical trials. All right. We have specific FOAs, some that allow applications to propose clinical trials and some that don't. And so you will see 2 of each of these announcements, one with clinical trials and one without, for both the REAP and the area.
And that's another time when it's important to make sure you check the list of institutes that participate, because I think even some institutes don't participate in one of the clinical trials or not, right? So you really always want to make sure that your work is relevant to an institute that is listed in the participating institutes for that RFA.
Correct. And there's also a little bit of nuance there too, because you'll have a list of participating organizations within each of those announcements. And we did talk about these notices of special interest. And it is possible for an institute to be on a notice of special interest and point to one of these opportunities. And even if they're not listed within that opportunity itself, if they're on that notice of special interest and there's special instructions on how to apply targeting that notice, then you still can get that application in. So it's really important to read all that stuff very carefully before you apply. Let's see. Oh, that's a very long one. Let's see. Can the R15 budget include PI salary and fringe benefits? That's a yes.
Yep.
If we are an ESI at a PUI, should we apply for an R15 or a K award? I think that's one where you're going to want to reach out to. I would go into Reporter. I would go through and identify an institute and talk to somebody.
Yeah, and a K award is usually a career-focused, investigator-focused kind of thing. So they definitely have different goals, and that's definitely something you'd want to read the announcements carefully and talk to the program staff. Oh, absolutely. Primarily undergraduate institute. Okay.
There you go. All righty. Well, thank you, Lisa. This has been a very informative session. I want to thank our sign language interpreter and our captioners. They've been fabulous throughout this conference. Please take a moment and fill out the feedback form. You're going to find it just where you found the button to join this session. At the end of our conference, please take a moment to fill out the overall survey for our feedback form for our conference as well. Again, take a deep breath. Look at all the materials we've got out there. Don't be afraid to reach out when you're in doubt. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. And thank you so much for participating. Take care.